right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I am your host, Omar Zaran, and we're in the middle of football season. Let's go ahead and talk a little NFL, talk a little NFL contracts. So, over the weekend, right before the week one Sunday slate started, the Dallas Cowboys announced that they have agreed to a contract extension with their quarterback, Dak Prescott, for 4 years, $240 million. This makes Prescott the highest paid quarterback in the league, and by default, the highest paid quarterback in league history. When it comes to the Cowboys, I think that there's a lot of jokes that go around. There's a lot of conversation around the team, probably because they get covered a lot, right? You know, ESPN is always leading segments about them. Podcasts are always talking about them. They're a very high interest level team for good and bad reasons, depending on where you sit in the fandom aspect, right? So there's going to be eyeballs on when the Cowboys pay heavily for a QB. And a lot of people think that, well, they should have just not paid him, let him go into free agency, and then, start again by drafting a young QB and developing that QB, similar to what they did with Prescott before, when they were moving on from the Tony Romo era prior to his arrival. So here's why I think that Dallas had to pay him. First of all, the Cowboys and Jerry Jones are very focused on winning now. Jones is getting older. He doesn't know how many years left he has of, possessing all of his faculties and eventually passing away. He wants to see another championship before that happens. And when that's the case, you can't rebuild with a rookie because you want to win now, right? So with the Cowboys are looking at it, we have to retain this guy because think of what you will about Prescott. At worst, he's a top 10 QB in this league today. At best, his ceiling is probably a top 6, top 5 QB, but he's in between that 5 to 10 range of however you rank QB. So the arm talent is there, the mobility's there, he has all the skills you want, right? So you generally pay those guys. And even if you don't think that they are the best in the league or the second best in the league, you're still going to pay them because quarterback's an important position. Beyond that, the Cowboys are a pretty good team. They're probably going to win 10 games, probably going to make the playoffs. They're not going to get a great draft spot. So getting like a Shador Sanders or a Quinn Ewers or whoever else is going to be at the top of the draft board next year, not really in their cards. So with their draft position, they probably end up with the fourth or fifth best QB in the draft, depending on what the draft is going to look like, right? So for them, they would much rather pay the guy they have and try to continue to compete. And so that's like the Cowboys' reasoning for doing this. And I tend to agree with it, is that they're trying to contend, right? They're trying to compete. They're trying to be as good of a football team as they can. And today it's with Dak Prescott. But what it's gotten me to thinking about this week is just this elevated importance of the QB position. I think we've talked about it a bit in previous episodes, so we might be rehashing it. But, there's a tax when it comes to quarterbacks. Quarterbacks now are making $50, $60 million a year. A bottom half of the league quarterback like Daniel Jones from the Giants is making $40 million a year. Okay, and these numbers are only going to go up. And the thing is that teams have to pay it. They're going to have to pay it because the league has placed this massive emphasis on the quarterback position, right? They have placed it so that it is just incredibly important and just vital to the success of your franchise. You can't hit QBs. It's a passing league. Everything hinges on the quarterback here, right? You can't just win and win at a high level for a sustained amount of years without having a guy, right? And it doesn't have to be the best guy. It could be a top 10 guy, but that is ultimately what you need to have success in today's NFL, or else you're just going to be, thinking about what to do. You look at the Carolina Panthers. They currently are one of the worst teams in the league. Why? It's starting to look more and more like Bryce Young is not the guy and that he's not very good. as I record this, so it's around 6 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday. The Panthers got blown out by the Saints, and Young looked terrible, right? He looks like he might be too small. He looks like he just hasn't really progressed and learned. And he, even with a good coach and Dave Canales, who has done wonders for different QBs over the years, and you just kind of, when you miss, you're starting all over again, right? And but when you have a guy who seems legit, you're gonna pay him because you're hoping and banking on that he has special moments in him that are going to be just enough to elevate you over the top. And when the top of the league is guys like Patrick Mahomes and guys like Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, these type of elite level talents, you need to have a guy who can compete with that, who make those same plays, right? So teams are always going to pay the quarterback tax. It's like, all right, what's the new market value set? We're going to go ahead and pay that new market value because we have to. It's almost impossible to be able to say, hey, here's a middling QB, we're going to make things happen with this middling QB. It just doesn't happen. It's why the Rams went and traded for Matt Stafford when they did. They felt like they had seen Jared Goff's peak. Now, Goff has rediscovered himself in Detroit, but at the time, that seemed to be sound logic by the Rams, and they were rewarded with a Super Bowl for their efforts. So teams are always going to try and pay the QB, and a lot of times when they pay a young QB, it's because they want to be able to see the next level happen. So that was the thought process with the Giants, right? They had one good year from Daniel Jones. They gave him his extension in the thoughts that, okay, this guy's figured it out. That hasn't happened, so they're going to, be resetting here pretty soon as well. But the thing to consider, in again, another reason why the teams pay the tax, is that you don't know what you're going to get in the draft with when it comes to QBs. You think about the Trevor Lawrence year. 5 quarterbacks were taken in that first round. Trevor Lawrence is the only one who's still with his original team. So you got these other guys who have bounced around the league, and it's incredibly hard to get right. There are some years where it seems like you got a couple good ones, but when you have 4 or 5 guys that are taken in the first round or two at the quarterback position, you are going to have some misses, right? So it's more than likely that half of the guys drafted in that round are going to miss. This year's draft had a lot of QBs taken. Very good chance half of them don't hit. Drake May couldn't win the starting job in New England. J.J. McCarthy already has a season-ending injury. Those are setbacks. Michael Penix is stuck behind Kirk Cousins. Again, a setback. So you don't know how that's going to shake out the rest of their career. So if you're a team that's trying to win, and most of the NFL teams are trying to win, then it becomes a calculation that you have to make. Like, all right, I got a guy who's pretty good. Do I roll the dice on somebody who could be great, or am I going to end up with another Zach Wilson or Sam Darnold? 2 Jets quarterbacks, but you get the idea that getting the right guy is hard. The Steelers won a game today with Justin Fields as their quarterback. He wasn't particularly special, but that shows you just how hard it is. He was a first round talent, top of the draft type guy, and hasn't really worked for him. And so that's goes to show you just why teams are going to pay the money, right? Now, when you think about the elevated importance of the position of QB, it's it's something that I kind of find that I have a little bit of an issue with at times, mainly because it almost seems like no matter what you do, if you have the quarterback, you're going to win. We saw it with the Patriots and Tom Brady that they just had, you know, a couple decent players and a bunch of like, mid-level players, but they had the greatest QB, so they won a bunch. We see it now with Kansas City. It doesn't matter who they cycle in or cycle out, as long as they have Patrick Mahomes, they're generally all right. And I wonder, is that ultimately good for football, right? Because if everything is about the QB, it's kind of like shooting threes in basketball. If everything is about shooting threes, then it just becomes a shooting contest, which is why a lot of people don't like the NBA. But if it's just a situation like, well, I'm never going to have a chance because I don't have the best quarterback, is that overall good if you're like a fan of a team? And I think if you're a fan of the Chiefs, you love that, right? If you're a fan of the team that has the quarterback, you love it. If you're a fan of a team that doesn't, you're kind of left out in the wind, kind of wondering like, man, when am I going to get fortunate enough to be able to get this guy on my team so I could see profound new heights of the position? And it's unfortunate because I always feel like football is supposed to be the ultimate team sport because nobody, for the most part, plays both ends of the floor, both ends of the sides of the ball. You if you're a great quarterback, you need your defense to make plays, and if you are a great defender, you need your offense to score points. It's a give and take, and we've seen multiple positions kind of get devalued over the last 5 to 10 years. Safety, middle linebacker, running back, and all in favor of pass rushers, quarterbacks, left tackles, everything that centers around the helios that is the quarterback position. And I do feel like we might be able to see some elevation here in the sense of positional versatility. So I wrote a piece on the website this week about Travis Hunter, the standout wide receiver cornerback combo out of Colorado, who's more than likely going to be a top five pick in the draft. He might be the number one overall pick in the draft. And where we could see a team that drafts him maybe use him as a corner in spots and a receiver in other spots, not full time on both, but kind of mix and match. And we've seen it with like running backs where like Christian McCaffrey very often, Jameer Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, they line out on in the slot and kind of do things in the passing game. And I think we could see more of that with more positional versatility to kind of differentiate other players from quarterbacks. You see it on the defensive line a lot, where guys who play end sometimes go inside, and the guys who play inside sometimes go and play end. Why wouldn't you see, those guys kind of be thrown in as outside linebackers in the pass game as well, type of thing? And I think what it's going to ultimately lead to is that this high emphasis on QB is going to be two things. One is that every elite athlete is going to continue to play the quarterback position, which we've seen manifest itself in the college game. Almost every quarterback is a running quarterback now, which wasn't the case about 10, 15 years ago. And the second thing that we're really going to start noticing here is that we're going to see more multi-positional type players because you almost have to be that to stand out and to make yourself invaluable and useful. If you're a running back, you better be able to run routes as a receiver at times. If you're a tight end, you better also be able to do receiver and maybe even shift to fullback and start blocking more as part of packages. If you are a corner, maybe you have to develop hand skills so that you could be a slot receiver in spots, right? All of this is with the intent of standing out from the sea of quarterbacks, right? And I think that would ultimately be a good thing because I think the devaluing of a position, it's discouraging from an encouragement perspective to continue playing a game, right? Like if you're a running back in high school, you feel incredibly limited because you go into college, you're probably going to be in a platoon system. If you get to the league, you're never going to be drafted in the first round unless you're just insanely special. But even the guys who are insanely special very rarely go in the first round. So, and you've become devalued. Wide receivers, for if you're in the league, you've become devalued because they just think receivers grow on trees coming out of college and cheap labor, that sort of thing. Everything but the QB, right? And I kind of wonder if there's really any going back from this moment. I don't think there is. I think it's basically an evolve or die situation for a lot of positions. If you're on the offensive line, I think you have to be able to play guard, center, or guard and tackle and be able to switch sides very efficiently. And, I think that when it comes to kind of circling back to the quarterback aspect, because these guys throw 40 times a game and sometimes run it 5 to 10 times a game, if not more, in the case of guys like Lamar Jackson, they're holding the ball the whole time and they're controlling so much that you have to be able to really be special. And if you're a team, you're kind of looking at this and you're seeing a reality here where the quarterback position is so important that your team is nothing without one, right? So they're going to continue to get drafted high. They're going to continue to get paid a lot of money because there's just been this massive importance. And it almost feels like in a weird kind of like sociological, political aspect, it's like an erosion of the middle class of player types and positions in the NFL, where right now left tackle's a premium, quarterback is a premium, and in some cases, an elite wide receiver is a premium, right? But it's become a thing that's become more and more and more pronounced. And I do wonder about the viability of a lot of this. It almost feels just like a glass jar that's wobbling on the table about to break. And if you gotta feel like if you're certain teams here and you have a QB that just isn't up to snuff, like even like you look at the Saints, they just had a monster game against Carolina, and Derek Carr played great, but if you're a Saints fan, what's your expectation for this year? Do you think you could go really far with him as your QB? You probably don't, because Derek Carr has a ceiling right now. He's a middle of the pack quarterback, and middle of the pack quarterbacks generally don't win Super Bowls. So it becomes a feast or famine where you have a massive amount of talent at the top with QBs, regardless of what else is around there. And it really makes the experiment of the San Francisco 49ers so interesting because they have Brock Purdy, who's elevating into being a better QB, but I still think he's on the outside of the top 10 more than likely. And they're going to have to pay him eventually and make decisions around other positions. We've already seen the friction with the Brandon Ayuk situation and Trent Williams and stuff. So they have a reckoning coming their way, and it seems like a lot of teams are just kind of playing the time game. We're like, all right, we draft a rookie, we have this window, right, to get as much talent in as possible to maximize that rookie deal. But then when the rookie gets paid, now we have to, work on the margins, and you're almost like scrambling at all times, and it's just different parts of the timeline. It just feels a little unsustainable. And I think that's why when you have a guy like a Patrick Mahomes who willingly takes less, the Chiefs benefit from that, right? By being able to pay other guys, being able to pay Chris Jones, for example, to anchor their defense to keep Patrick Mahomes in place. Even though Patrick is going to still has a very massive deal, still very well paid, as he should be. He's the best player in the league. But I just think that we're going to continue to see these quarterback contracts be what they are, right? So people will get mad at when eventually a player's making 70 million, 80 million, 90 million a year to play QB, and it doesn't matter who the player is, it's just a matter of when they're eligible for their extension. And it's just a reality in today's NFL that we as fans probably have to get more used to because we're going to be like, oh, I can't believe we're paying this guy $60 million, right? Every time that Dak throws an interception. That's the cost of doing business in today's NFL. All right, everybody, a little bit of a shorter episode this week. Thank you so much for tuning in for another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. Please make sure to like, subscribe, follow, leave a review on the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Make sure to check out all the written pieces at deepcoversports.com, which is coming out with a couple of pieces every week. Also, make sure to check out offtheballnetwork.com. I just released a piece there about the Kansas City Chiefs, so make sure to check out Off the Ball Network as well. But until next time, I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Deep Cover Podcast.